What if the birth of Christ was never meant to be confined to a single date, a distant manger, or a chapter in history, but was intended to unfold within you, here and now? What if the most powerful spiritual truth was not something to be admired from afar, but something to be realized internally? This question alone has the power to shake everything you thought you understood about faith, purpose, and transformation. From the earliest moments of life, attention is trained outward, toward rules, traditions, authorities, and stories passed down through generations. Over time, the sacred is placed somewhere out there, separated from daily experience. Christ becomes a symbol to honor, a name to speak, a figure to revere. Yet hidden beneath layers of tradition lies a truth so profound that when it is grasped, it rearranges the entire inner world. The birth of Christ is not only an event to remember, but a state of consciousness to awaken. This realization does not arrive with noise or spectacle. It begins quietly, almost unnoticed, as a subtle stirring within. A sense that something deeper is calling for attention. A feeling that life is meant to be more than survival, routine, or endless striving. In this still moment, awareness shifts. The question is no longer what do I believe, but what is being born within me. To grasp the birth of Christ within is to recognize that divinity was never meant to be distant. It was meant to be expressed. The same love, truth, and light associated with Christ are not reserved for admiration. They are qualities meant to awaken in human consciousness. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about remembering who you are beneath fear, conditioning, and limitation. When this understanding begins to dawn, it challenges everything built on separation. The idea that you are broken, unworthy, or incomplete starts to loosen its grip. The belief that salvation exists outside of you begins to crumble. In its place arises a new awareness. Transformation begins within, not through force, but through awakening. This is where the true meaning of birth reveals itself. Birth implies emergence. Something that already exists comes into awareness. Just as a seed contains the blueprint of the tree long before it breaks the soil, divine consciousness exists within, long before it is recognized. The birth of Christ within is the moment this inner truth moves from potential into realization. At first, this awakening may feel unsettling. Old identities resist dissolution. Familiar beliefs feel threatened. The mind searches for certainty, while the heart senses freedom. This tension is not a mistake. It is a sign that something real is happening. Growth often begins where comfort ends. The inner birth does not destroy you, it reveals you. As this realization deepens, life is no longer viewed through the same lens. Events are no longer random. Pain is no longer meaningless. Joy is no longer fleeting. Everything becomes part of a larger unfolding. The inner world begins to take priority over external validation. Silence becomes meaningful. Stillness becomes powerful. Awareness sharpens. This is not about religion as structure. It is about truth as experience. The birth of Christ within does not require perfect behavior or flawless belief. It requires openness, a willingness to let go of what no longer serves, a readiness to allow light to enter places long ruled by fear. It is the courage to stop running from the inner self and finally listen. When this awakening begins, something unmistakable happens. Life feels intimate again. Purpose feels closer. Love feels less conditional. The world does not necessarily change overnight, but perception does. And perception changes everything. You begin to sense that you are not merely living life. Life is unfolding through you. This is the doorway. This is the threshold moment. The realization that the most sacred birth is not something to celebrate once a year, but something to embody every day. And once this truth is glimpsed, there is no returning to sleep. The awakening has begun. For centuries, the birth of Christ has been placed carefully within the boundaries of history, assigned a time, a place, and a story retold with reverence. While history has its value, stopping there limits the depth of its meaning. When truth is confined only to the past, it loses its power to transform the present. The deeper purpose was never remembrance alone, but realization. Not something to look back on, but something to step into. When the birth of Christ is understood only as an external event, it remains symbolic but distant. It inspires, but it does not activate. Yet the moment this birth is seen as an inner reality, everything changes. History becomes a doorway rather than a destination. The story stops being about what happened then and starts revealing what is meant to happen now. Reality begins within consciousness. Every transformation that has ever reshaped a life started as an internal shift, long before it appeared outwardly. In this sense, the birth of Christ represents the awakening of divine awareness inside the human mind and heart. It is the moment when truth rises within consciousness and begins to reorder perception, values, and identity. This is why the message has endured beyond time, culture, and language. It speaks to something universal, the human capacity to awaken to a higher state of being. The birth is not about geography. It is about consciousness. Not about lineage, but about light emerging within awareness. When grasped this way, the story is no longer distant. It becomes personal. Moving beyond history does not reject it, it completes it. History shows what happened. Inner realization reveals why it matters. The outer story becomes a mirror pointing inward, inviting reflection rather than passive belief. Instead of asking, "Do I accept this story?" the question becomes, "Is this truth alive within me?" As this understanding deepens, the idea of separation begins to dissolve. The belief that the divine exists only outside, accessible through intermediaries, starts to weaken. In its place grows a powerful realization. The same divine essence attributed to Christ is present as potential within every human being, not identical in expression but equal in source. This realization does not inflate the ego, it humbles it. It reveals that true greatness is not domination or superiority, but alignment with truth, love, and compassion. The birth of Christ within is not about claiming divinity. It is about embodying divine qualities in daily life. This is where spirituality becomes lived experience rather than abstract belief. When truth shifts from historical memory to inner reality, faith becomes dynamic. It is no longer sustained by repetition, but by awareness, no longer dependent on external proof, but grounded in inner knowing. This faith does not need defense. It expresses itself naturally through clarity, integrity, and peace. At this stage, the inner world becomes more important than appearances. Attention turns inward, not in isolation but in recognition. Thoughts are observed. Motives are questioned. Reactions are softened. Awareness expands. Slowly, a new center forms, one not rooted in fear or identity but in presence. This is where the birth truly begins to feel real. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. A subtle authority emerges from within. Decisions become clearer. Values shift. What once felt urgent loses its grip. What once felt impossible begins to feel natural. This is not imagination, it is alignment. Beyond history lies responsibility. If the birth of Christ is an inner reality, then it is not something to admire passively. It asks to be lived. It calls for consciousness to rise above habit, fear, and unconscious patterns. It invites a new way of seeing the self and the world. This understanding brings the message into the present moment, where it belongs, no longer frozen in time but alive in awareness, no longer distant but intimate. And once this shift occurs, the story is no longer something heard, it becomes something unfolding within. When the truth moves from understanding into awareness, the inner birth begins. This is not a single moment marked by certainty or clarity, but a gradual awakening that unfolds from within. At first, it may feel like a subtle change, almost imperceptible, yet its impact is profound. Something within starts to realign, and life begins to respond differently. The inner birth does not announce itself through emotion or excitement. It reveals itself through awareness. Old patterns begin to lose their authority. Reactions that once felt automatic are now observed. Thoughts that once controlled the mind are questioned. A quiet distance forms between who you are and what you think. In that space, something new starts to breathe. Fear, which once dictated decisions, slowly loosens its grip. Not because fear disappears entirely, but because it is no longer believed unquestioningly. Awareness sees through it. The mind recognizes that fear was never a guide, only a habit. With this recognition, courage arises naturally, not as effort, but as clarity. As the inner birth deepens, guilt and shame begin to dissolve, not through denial but through understanding. The realization dawns that punishment was never the purpose of awareness. Growth was. Mistakes are no longer seen as evidence of unworthiness, but as teachers that revealed where consciousness was asleep. Compassion replaces self-judgment, and healing begins. This birth awakens a new relationship with silence. Stillness no longer feels empty or uncomfortable. It feels alive. In quiet moments, there is a sense of presence that does not depend on thought or identity. It is here that the inner light becomes noticeable, not as an idea, but as a felt knowing, something steady, watchful, and deeply peaceful. The heart begins to shift alongside the mind. Emotional reactions soften. Defensiveness fades. The need to be right weakens. In its place, understanding grows. The inner birth opens the heart without forcing it. Love is no longer something to chase or earn. It becomes a natural state of being. With this shift comes clarity. Not all answers appear at once, but confusion no longer feels overwhelming. Decisions are made from a deeper place. The constant inner conflict between desire and fear begins to quiet. Alignment replaces struggle. Life feels less like resistance and more like flow. This inner birth also brings a new sensitivity to truth. Falsehood, whether internal or external, becomes harder to tolerate. The mind can no longer comfortably live in contradiction. This is not rigidity, it is integrity. The inner self begins to seek coherence between thought, word, and action. As awareness grows, the need for external validation diminishes. Approval, comparison, and recognition lose their power. Worth is no longer measured by outcomes or opinions. It is sensed inwardly, unshaken by circumstance. This inner stability becomes a foundation that cannot be easily disturbed. The birth continues quietly, reshaping identity from the inside out. The old self, built on fear and conditioning, begins to fall away, not through force, but through irrelevance. A deeper self steps forward, one that is attentive, grounded, and awake. This is the beginning, not of perfection, but of presence. Not of escape from life, but of engagement with it from a higher level of awareness. The inner birth marks the moment when consciousness starts to lead, and the soul begins to speak. As the inner birth continues to unfold, the heart becomes the primary place of transformation. This shift is not sudden or dramatic, but steady and unmistakable. Where the heart once carried layers of protection, pain, and judgment, it now begins to soften, not because life has become easier, but because awareness has become deeper. The heart learns to release its armor. Old defenses that were built to survive no longer feel necessary. The constant need to protect, to react, to close off begins to fade. In its place arises a quiet openness, a willingness to feel without being overwhelmed, to care without fear of loss. This openness is strength, not weakness. Judgment is one of the first patterns to dissolve. Judgment of others, judgment of circumstances, and most powerfully, judgment of the self. The heart begins to see beyond surface behavior into deeper causes. Understanding replaces blame. Compassion replaces criticism. This does not mean discernment is lost. It means condemnation is no longer needed. Forgiveness emerges naturally during this transformation, not as a moral obligation but as an inner release. Holding on to resentment starts to feel heavy, unnecessary, and misaligned. The heart recognizes that forgiveness is not about excusing harm. It is about freeing consciousness from the weight of the past. With each release, the heart becomes lighter, clearer, and more alive. Love itself takes on a new meaning. It is no longer dependent on conditions, outcomes, or reciprocity. It is not something turned on or off by circumstances. Love becomes a state of being, quiet, steady, and inclusive. The heart learns to love without bargaining, without fear, without control. As this love deepens, emotional reactions begin to change. Triggers lose their intensity. Situations that once caused anger or withdrawal are met with awareness instead. The heart responds rather than reacts. There is space between stimulus and response, and in that space, wisdom speaks. This transformation also brings emotional honesty. The heart no longer hides from truth. Feelings are acknowledged without being suppressed or exaggerated. Sadness is allowed without despair. Joy is welcomed without attachment. Emotions move through awareness instead of becoming identity. This emotional clarity is deeply freeing. With an awakened heart, relationships shift. The need to possess, control, or be validated diminishes. Connections become more authentic, less transactional. Listening deepens. Presence increases. Even in silence there is understanding. The heart no longer seeks completion through others, it shares wholeness. The inner birth also awakens reverence for life itself. Small moments gain meaning. Ordinary experiences feel rich with presence. Gratitude arises not because everything is perfect, but because awareness recognizes the gift of being alive. The heart learns to appreciate without clinging. Perhaps the most profound change is this: the heart becomes trustworthy. No longer driven by fear or wounded patterns, it becomes a reliable guide. Decisions made from this space feel aligned, even when difficult. The heart leads with clarity, humility, and courage. This is the transformation that reshapes everything quietly. The heart, once guarded and reactive, becomes open and responsive. And through this openness, the inner light finds a clear path to express itself in the world. As the heart softens and opens, the mind begins its own profound renewal. This is not a process of gaining new beliefs, but of releasing old illusions. The mind, once dominated by fear, conditioning, and repetition, slowly comes under the guidance of awareness. Thought no longer rules unquestioned, it is observed, refined, and aligned. The first change is subtle but powerful. The constant inner noise begins to quiet. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer carry the same authority. The mind stops reacting automatically to every impulse. Space appears between thought and identity. In that space, freedom is born. Old mental patterns, self-doubt, negativity, limitation, start to lose credibility. They are seen for what they are: learned habits, not truth. The mind realizes it has been repeating stories that were never questioned. Once seen clearly, these stories can no longer dominate. Awareness dissolves them without struggle. This renewal brings clarity. Confusion fades not because all answers are known, but because the mind is no longer fighting itself. Inner conflict softens. The constant tug-of-war between fear and desire weakens. Thought becomes simpler, cleaner, more intentional. The mind learns to serve rather than control. With this shift, perception changes. Situations are no longer interpreted through old wounds or assumptions. The mind stops projecting past experiences onto present moments. Each moment is met fresh, without distortion. This clarity allows wisdom to arise naturally, without effort or force. The inner dialogue also transforms. The harsh, critical voice that once judged every action begins to fade. In its place arises a tone of understanding and patience. The mind becomes supportive, rather than punishing. Motivation no longer comes from pressure, but from alignment. As renewal deepens, the mind begins to think in harmony with truth. Thoughts become grounded in integrity rather than fear. Decisions are made from awareness rather than impulse. Even when challenges appear, the mind remains steady. It no longer exaggerates problems or collapses into anxiety. This renewed mind understands the power of focus. Attention is no longer scattered across worries and regrets. It rests more fully in the present moment. Productivity becomes purposeful. Action becomes precise. Energy is conserved rather than wasted on mental resistance. Perhaps most importantly, the mind learns humility. It recognizes its limits. It no longer pretends to know everything. This humility opens the door to deeper insight. Silence becomes a teacher. Listening becomes more important than proving. The mind becomes receptive. In this state, thinking aligns with being. There is coherence between inner truth and outer action. The mind is no longer an obstacle, it is an instrument. Clear, disciplined, and calm, it supports the expression of the inner light rather than obscuring it. This renewal does not make the mind passive. It makes it powerful in a new way. Focused without tension. intelligent without arrogance, active without anxiety. The mind, once fragmented, becomes whole, and in this wholeness, consciousness finds a stable foundation, ready to move from inner awakening into lived expression. When the heart has softened and the mind has been renewed, life begins to flow from a different center. Action is no longer driven by fear, ambition, or the need to prove worth. It arises from alignment. This is what it means to live from the inner light, not as an idea, but as a lived reality that quietly shapes every choice. Living from the inner light does not remove challenges, but it transforms the way they are met. Difficulty is no longer seen as punishment or failure. It becomes refinement. Each challenge is understood as an invitation to remain present, grounded, and aware. The inner light does not eliminate darkness. It reveals the path through it. There is a deep sense of steadiness that emerges. Life may move quickly, circumstances may change, but the inner center remains calm. This stability does not come from control but from trust. Trust in awareness, trust in alignment, trust that clarity will arise when needed. Decisions made from this place feel clean and intentional. There is less overthinking, less second-guessing. Action flows naturally from inner knowing. Even when outcomes are uncertain, there is confidence in the direction taken. The inner light guides without force. Living from within also reshapes priorities. What once seemed urgent loses importance. What truly matters becomes clear. Integrity, presence, and truth rise above appearance, comparison, and approval. Life is no longer measured by external success alone, but by inner coherence. This alignment brings courage. Not loud or aggressive courage, but quiet certainty. The courage to say no when something is misaligned. The courage to stand still when pressure demands movement. The courage to act when fear suggests retreat. This courage is steady because it is rooted in awareness, not emotion. The inner light also brings patience. There is no rush to arrive somewhere else. Each moment is understood as complete in itself. Growth is allowed to unfold naturally. Time is no longer an enemy. Waiting becomes purposeful. Silence becomes meaningful. As this way of living deepens, effort decreases. Struggle gives way to flow. This does not mean passivity, it means efficiency. Energy is no longer wasted on resistance. Actions are precise, intentional, and effective. Life feels less heavy, less forced. Relationships shift as well. Interaction becomes clearer and more honest. There is less need to defend or impress. Communication becomes grounded in truth. Presence becomes the greatest offering. The inner light shapes not only what is said but how it is said. Living from the inner light also brings a sense of responsibility, not guilt but stewardship. Awareness recognizes that thoughts, words, and actions carry influence. Care is taken. Intention becomes conscious. Life is lived with reverence rather than carelessness. This way of being does not seek attention, yet it cannot remain hidden. It carries a quiet authority, a calm confidence, a peace that does not depend on circumstances. The inner light begins to illuminate not just the inner world, but everything it touches. And from this illumination, life starts to feel purposeful. Not because everything is planned, but because everything is aligned. As life is lived from the inner light, a subtle but profound shift takes place. The focus moves away from expression through words and toward expression through being. There is no effort to convince, impress, or instruct. Truth begins to communicate itself through presence. This is the stage where the message is no longer spoken, it is lived. Identity undergoes a final refinement here. The need to be recognized as wise, spiritual, or right fades away. What remains is authenticity. Actions align naturally with inner truth. There is no division between belief and behavior. Life itself becomes consistent, integrated, whole. In this state, presence carries weight. Silence communicates more than explanation. Stillness has influence. Others may sense clarity, calm, or reassurance without knowing why. This is not intentional, it is the natural effect of alignment. When inner conflict dissolves, coherence becomes visible. The way challenges are met now reflects the inner transformation. Instead of resistance, there is understanding. Instead of reaction, there is response. Even in disagreement, respect remains. Even in difficulty, peace is not abandoned. This consistency becomes a quiet teaching. Humility deepens at this stage. There is no claim of arrival or completion. Awareness recognizes that growth is continuous. Learning never ends. This humility keeps the heart open and the mind receptive. There is strength without rigidity, confidence without arrogance. The message being lived is simple, yet powerful. Truth does not need force. Love does not need performance. Integrity does not need applause. When lived sincerely, these qualities speak for themselves. They invite rather than demand. They inspire without pressure. Daily life becomes the expression of this message. Ordinary actions are infused with presence. Attention is given fully. Care is taken naturally. Even routine moments carry meaning. Nothing is considered too small to reflect awareness. This lived message also brings discernment. Not every situation requires explanation. Not every truth needs to be spoken. Silence is used wisely. Speech becomes intentional. Words are chosen carefully, aligned with clarity rather than impulse. There is also a deep respect for individuality. No attempt is made to shape others or impose understanding. Each path is honored. Trust replaces control. The inner light recognizes itself in different forms, without comparison. In becoming the message, life feels unified. There is no separation between inner and outer, sacred and ordinary. Everything becomes part of the same unfolding awareness. This unity brings ease, simplicity, and depth. The transformation that began quietly within now radiates outward, not through effort, but through authenticity. The message is no longer something carried. It is something embodied. Now the turning point arrives, not as a dramatic moment, but as a conscious choice. Everything that is unfolded points to this single truth. The birth of Christ within is not automatic. It waits for permission. It waits for willingness. It waits for awareness to say yes. The question is no longer about understanding, belief, or agreement. It is about readiness. Readiness to release old identities that were built on fear. Readiness to let go of patterns that no longer serve. Readiness to stop seeking truth outwardly and allow it to rise from within. This is the moment to become still and honest, to look inward without judgment, to notice where awareness has been avoided, where fear has been obeyed, where truth has been postponed. Nothing needs to be fixed, only seen. Awareness itself is the beginning of transformation. Let the inner noise settle. Let distractions lose their grip. Make space for silence, not as absence, but as presence. In that space, listen, not for voices or signs, but for clarity. For the quiet knowing that has always been there, waiting beneath the surface. Choose alignment over comfort. Choose presence over habit. Choose truth over familiarity. These choices do not require perfection, only sincerity. Each small act of awareness strengthens the inner birth. Each moment of honesty allows it to grow. Do not wait for the world to change before awakening. Do not wait for certainty before stepping forward. Awakening creates clarity, not the other way around. Begin where you are. Begin now. The conditions are already sufficient. Allow the inner light to guide daily life. Let it shape decisions, reactions, and intentions. Let it inform how time is spent, how words are spoken, how attention is given. Transformation happens not in grand gestures, but in consistent awareness. This is an invitation, not a demand. Nothing is forced. Nothing is rushed. The birth unfolds at the pace of willingness, but once allowed, it cannot be undone. Awareness, once awakened, continues to grow. Let this not remain a reflection or an idea. Let it become practice. Let it become lived. Let it become real in thought, in action, in being. The birth of Christ within is not waiting in the future. It is waiting in this moment. Allow it. Nurture it. Live from it. And let your life become the evidence.